Psalm 81 verse 7. Rise and fall. But you like men shall die, and shall fall like one of the princes. Psalm 81 verse 7. Douay Rheims. When I was in college, I used to make my own versions of those demotivational posters that were parodies of motivational posters in the corporate world. I had one with an image of a fighter pilot in a cockpit and the title of Failure, with the caption reading, "You'll never know how high you can fly until you realize how far you can fall." Probably not as clever as I thought at the time, but it was at least pithy. And to be fair, while I originally meant it sarcastically in typical on-the-bubble millennial snark, there is probably at least a bit of truth somewhere in there. I was reminded of St. Vincent of Lérins in his commentary, wherein he speaks of some of the luminaries of doctrine, such as Tertullian in the West and Origen in the East, as being great trials to the Church, in that both of them eventually strayed from orthodoxy. Concerning Tertullian, he says, quote, "Was not his genius of such unrivaled strength and vehemence that there was scarcely any obstacle which he proposed to himself to overcome, that he did not penetrate by acuteness or crush by weight? As to his style, who can sufficiently set forth its praise? It was knit together with so much cogency of argument that it compelled assent, even where it failed to persuade. Every word almost was a sentence, every sentence a victory." St. Vincent of Lérins, Commentary 1846. He has even greater praise for Origen. Quote, "Time would fail me to recount, even in a very small measure, the excellencies of this man, all of which, nevertheless, not only contributed to the glory of religion, but also increased the magnitude of the trial. For who in the world would lightly desert a man of so great genius, so great learning, so great influence, and would not rather adopt that saying, that he would rather be wrong with Origen than be right with others?" St. Vincent of Lérins, Commentary 1846. The difficulty is that both were such esteemed men whose learning and erudition brought great fruit to the faith, yet their straying from truth becomes a great trial for the Church precisely because of their greatness. Quote, "What shall I say more? The result was that very many were led astray from the integrity of the faith, not by any human excellencies of this so great man, this so great doctor, this so great prophet, but, as the event showed, by the too perilous trial which he proved to be." St. Vincent of Lérins, Commentary 1846. Both receive the same concluding epitaph. Quote, "If there rise in the midst of thee a prophet, thou shalt not hear the words of that prophet. For the Lord your God trieth you, that it may appear whether you love him with all your heart and with all your soul, or not." Deuteronomy chapter 13, verses 1-3, Douay Rheims. It is the exceeding splendor and greatness of such luminaries that creates such danger, for their brilliance and genius can be so dazzling that one is led into error unknowingly with them. As St. Vincent said, it was almost like one would rather be wrong with Origen than be right with others. The pride that can creep in with great learning is also on display with such luminaries. For pride can be its own form of blindness that makes it difficult to see how precarious a ledge one is standing upon. The psalmist concludes the indictment of the wicked who judge unjustly, and now provides the sentence. These who were gods and sons of the Most High are now shown how weak and helpless they are. In their pride they considered themselves as gods and thought that they could judge as they saw fit, rather than according to justice, thus making a law unto themselves, which is the primordial sin with which our first parents were tempted. The serpent in the garden reframed good and evil as something that they would know from themselves, rather than knowing good and evil through God's justice. This is why the serpent tells Eve that she will not die. That law is God's law, but she has the chance to make her own law, one that arises from and correlates to her own desires and will, just as the ancient serpent did for himself. Lucifer, after all, was created as one of the highest of the angels, and like all the other angels, was given the chance to enter into the beatific vision through grace. However, it was this grace that he couldn't countenance, for that would entail receiving that which he did not already possess, and such grace he could see would eventually culminate for men with the divine word taking on flesh. The blinding beauty of his angelic purity he turned into the blinding light of pride. Quote, "And thou saidst in thy heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit in the mountain of the covenant, in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the height of the clouds, I will be like the Most High. but yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, into the depth of the pit. Isaiah chapter 14, verses 13 through 15, Douay Rheims. In a similar manner, our first parents were made in the image of God, and thus there is an irony in that the very thing that the serpent promises them, that they will become like God, is something that they already possess by virtue of their creation. But like the tempter, they wish to possess this likeness to divinity by virtue of their own will, rather than receiving from the Lord in creation. There is thus a certain inherent spitefulness to pride that rejects the good that God gives simply because it is a gift from Him. The psalmist ties the judgment of sin from the garden into the sentence pronounced against those who judge unjustly. Those who should shine forth in their execution of justice like gods, as sons of the Most High, will instead be found to be simply weak men who will wither and die. God desired greater for them, but in their overweening pride and reaching beyond themselves, they fall lower than they started. This fall is like one of the princes, which entails a certain lack of discrimination in the sentence of judgment. Whether those who judge unjustly are princes or not, the end result is the same. The term prince is often used for angels as well, such as in the book of Daniel, and thus there is also a cosmic dimension to this. Man in his creation was made a little less than the angels, but in his pride can even seek to build towers to heaven so as to, in his own way, become like the Most High. However, he should take his warning from the angels. Quote, "For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but delivered them, drawn down by infernal ropes to the lower hell, unto torments to be reserved unto judgment, the Lord knoweth how to deliver the godly from temptation, but to reserve the unjust unto the day of judgment to be tormented." 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4, 9, Douay Rheims. We should thus take heed in all our actions, especially when we are placed into positions of authority or power or success. For the higher we may rise, the farther we might fall, and it is sadly all too often the reality of our race that such exaltation becomes the locus of ultimate humiliation and a lapse from truth and goodness and justice. Quote, "I said, you are gods, and you are all the children of the Most High. That is, to all of you I promise celestial happiness, but you, through the infirmity of your flesh, shall die like men, and through the haughtiness of soul, like one of the princes, that is, the devil, shall not be exalted, but shall fall." As if he said, though the days of your life are so few that you speedily die like men, this avails not to your correction. But like the devil, whose days are many in this world, because he dies not in the flesh, you are lifted up so that you fall. St. Augustine, Expositions on the Psalms, 81:6. But you like men shall die, and shall fall like one of the princes. Psalm 81, verse 7, Douay Rheims.